My name is Frank Rojas. I do work for Los Angeles Pacific University in two capacities. I serve the university. On a full-time basis, I'm the Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President here at LAPU. What that really means is all the roles, all the positions, whether it was marketing, whether it was student services, whether it was student success, enrollment, or counseling, those are all under my span of care. So your coaches, your enrollment counselors, and the people in financial aid, they're all a part of my team. And our goal is to make sure you have the best experience here at LAPU. I'm also a faculty at LAPU. I offer courses in mostly in the graduate programs in business, leadership, and I see a few familiar faces here. And so I'm also a faculty member. So the idea with this session this evening is, one of the things, and I should also say I just finished my doctoral work last year. So it wasn't more than a year ago that I was sitting in your chair, really wrestling with this idea of writing and what it means to write academically, and what is this APA, and why does it matter, and so it dawned on me that one of the best ways that we could help support you as students at Los Angeles Pacific University is doing workshop like this to help give you some good baseline information about what APA is, why it's important, and how to navigate it. I do want to maybe be clear on a couple things. While I'm really proficient in APA, I'm not an APA master. But my goal is, after this next hour, you'll know enough about this to successfully navigate some of the key things as it relates to writing an APA. And if at the end of the session you're not sure how to do it, you should feel comfortable in where to look for the information. Okay, does that make sense? Get a thumbs up. All right, good. So I'm going to share my screen, and Brent will tell you that I have the innate ability of messing technology up from the go. But can you all see that? Can somebody just give me a thumbs up? Can you see that okay? And you can still hear me, right? Perfect. So it worked. So we're going to spend the next maybe 25, 30 minutes going to providing you an overview of APA formatting. So the first question you might be asking yourself is, why is APA important? And the best explanation I can give you is that APA is in some ways a contractual agreement between you and the person you're writing for. APA is a standard in which we want to write to, and imagine going to a different country and you didn't speak the same language, or people are speaking several different languages. There would be disconnects in communication, right? And in that very same framework, APA is to make sure that we're all operating from the same type of framework when it comes to reading and writing. It's also important because APA provides clarity on sometimes some very complex topics, okay? APA makes papers easier to read, and quite honestly, it makes it easier to write. And by the end of this workshop, hopefully you'll understand what that means. APA does provide uniformity and flow, and it really helps as a writer. It's going to help keep you focused on the content of the paper, okay? In terms of resources, I wanted to prepare you and give you some resources so that as you're working on your posts or as you're working on your assignments, you have some resources to be able to look at for APA. So the first one is a one that if you've ever had my class, I keep it on my desk at all time. It's the APA manual. This is about $60 on Amazon. And while it's an additional expense, if you're early on in your program, this is one I'd recommend. If you can do it. I purchased the spiral bound only because it's got these tabs here. And so as I'm writing, or as I'm correcting, or as if I'm working on an article, if I'm confused with something, it gives me a great reference point, okay? So this is the APA reference manual. There are two other resources I have listed here. One, and both of these are free, by the way, and both of these are just as effective as a manual. One is the APA Style Guide, and you can find that at apa style.apa.org. and the other is Purdue OWL. And this is our online writing lab, the Purdue OWL. Both of these are free and they're just effective as a manual. I prefer a written book copy, and so that's why I purchased a manual as well. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about APA writing style and grammar. The first thing to understand is that APA is going to encourage you to write first-person pronouns rather than third-person pronouns when describing the work you did and when expressing your own viewpoints. So APA wants you to use, APA 7 would like you to use I or we, and it's depending on the circumstance. Just as a point of reference, when you see this notation here, this is APA 7, section 4.16. So this is pointing you back to in the manual, the standard that I'm referring to. So for example, instead of saying the authors conducted an experiment, if this is an experiment that you conducted yourself, or if this is an experience that you've had yourself, for example, you can write this in first person. We conducted an experiment. I conducted an experiment, okay? The other thing to understand about APA is what voice means. And have any of you ever been told you're writing in passive voice? This is what they're referring to. And voice describes the relationship between a verb and the subject and the object associated with it. So APA encourages using an active voice when stressing, for example, the actions on research. So instead of saying something like the participants have been asked questions, you want to be more active. We asked the participant. Do you see how although you're saying the same thing, one is a little bit more passive while one is a little bit more active? Okay, so when you're stressing actions about something, for example, like research, you can use an active voice. However, when you're stressing the recipient of an action, you want to slip into a passive voice. So instead of saying the tests were inconclusive, right, which is the active way to say it, you would want to say something like, we found the test inconclusive, because it's the object, it's the relationship between the verb and the object, okay? All right, and if you have any questions, you can raise your hand, you can try to get my attention, or you can jot it down, and then we'll get back to it after. So in terms of APA, we talked a little bit about grammar. Let's talk a little bit about language. It should be clear. Especially if you're like me, I love to communicate and I love words. But APA, your language should be clear. It should be concise. So you're looking for ways to condense information when you can. And while I'm not saying to limit your vocation, language in APA 7, section 4 says, try to use plain, simple, descriptive adjectives and minimize figurative language, okay? So understand that we want, anybody will want to see you exercise your vocabulary, but be very precise and clear and concise in your word choices, okay? This is super important, especially if you have assignments that have word limits. This is where clear, concise language comes into play. If you're submitting something, obviously it should be typed. It should be double spaced. Okay, so APA papers should be double spaced. They should have 1-inch margins on both sides. You'll want to use a standard 10 to 12 point font. New Times Roman is usually a good fall to. And if you are printing a submission, you want to print on standard 8.5 by 11. If your faculty, if your professors give you other direction, then you certainly want to do what your professors or your faculty say. But these are the standards as laid out by APA 7, okay? Does that make sense? All right, good. I've got some nodding heads, so we're good to go. So let's talk about some of the elements of the APA paper. And for this conversation, we're going to differentiate between professional papers and student papers. In most cases, the papers you're working on here at Los Angeles Pacific University and the papers that you're working on in your studies are going to be student papers. So the first thing to understand is that your page number needs to be in the upper right-hand corner, okay? One of the things to be aware of is to make sure that there's parity in the font size and style. one of the things I've noticed is that sometimes the page number comes through in a different font or in a different style. So if this is New Times Roman 12, make sure this is New Times Roman 12. If it's a professional paper, you're going to have a shortened title, all in caps, in the upper left-hand corner. Okay, so this is the heading, the header. Excuse me. This is a header for a professional paper. A student paper doesn't have this. You would omit this from a student paper. Okay. We've already talked about this. Note that APA 7, there's different formats for professional and student papers. Most of these differences are going to be in the title page, which we're going to take a look at, and they're going to be in the running header, okay? So let's take a look at the title page for a student paper. When you're submitting a paper, this is what the title page should look like for a student paper APA 7. I'll walk you through the elements. You have the page number up in the top right-hand corner. Starting at line 3 or 4, you have the title of the paper in bold, and you can see that the major words are in cap. Okay? You have a double space here between the title and between the author or authors of the submission. No, and obviously, there's no title or no degree. You have the name of the institution or the department. So for example, this paper was written for Purdue University, the Department of English. You have the name of the course, the name of the faculty, and the date submitted, okay? So if you have to format a paper for APA 7 and they ask for a title page, this is what it should look like, okay? And you can always reference 2.3 in the APA manual. This is what's providing the standard, okay? Is that good? In a professional paper, you'll have some other elements. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but you can see you have a running header here. You're missing some of the elements here. Like, for example, you're missing the name of the faculty, you're missing the date submitted, and you'll have an author's note. Since we're all, most of us will be submitting student papers, we're not going to spend any more time on this. I just wanted to show you the differences between a professional and a student paper, okay? If you're asked to put an abstract together, and some of you might, especially on bigger works, an abstract, the best way to think about it is it's a summary. You're telegraphing to the reader what they're going to read. There is an art to writing an abstract. The first thing is understand that it's about 150 to 200 words, okay? So most minor assignments aren't going to require an abstract. So if it's a 450 to 500 word document, more times than not, you're not going to be asked for an abstract. When it gets bigger is typically when you'll have abstracts. You'll see that you'll have the title, you'll have abstract is centered in the middle. You'll see here that it's justified on the left-hand margin and it's not indented. There is no indentation, okay? So this is a little bit different than writing the text of a normal paper. The other thing is you'll have these things called keywords. Keywords, if this paper were to make it into an electronic database, for example, keywords would provide somebody to look, for example, if I wanted to look for papers about college teaching, scale development, and educational assessment, when this gets indexed into a database, it would pull up this paper. These were some of the keywords that I looked, okay? The key thing to remember about an abstract is that it needs to be concise, and you want to stick to about 150 to 200 words, okay? So now let's talk about the main body of a text. In a paper that has a title page, an abstract, your main body is going to start with a page number 3. If there's no abstract required, then the first page of your text is going to start with the number 2, right? Because you're taking the abstract out and it's just starting on the second page. There should be a title that's center and bold for the full title of the paper, centered on the top page on the first line. Pages should be double spaced. with all sections following without a break. So one of the errors I see is that there's an extra space between sections. There's a setting on Word that if we have time, I'm going to show you how to do that. It's a real quick setting that fixes this. Brent's shaking his head because he knows what it is. But if you don't set it, you'll always have an extra space between paragraph settings, and I'll show you where that is. You want to, and then you want to make sure some other elements, you want to make sure you identify sources you use in the paper. And if you're using tables and figures, you want to make sure that those are formatted properly. And we're going to look at examples of these here. But these are some of the elements of the main body of a paper, okay? Now we're going to get into some specific things about APA. And probably the biggest obstacle I see, or the biggest area I see students struggling with, is references, okay? Your reference page should be its own page. So if you have a 3-page written document, your reference page should be page 4, and we're going to look at examples of that. But what goes into a reference page, it's generally anything that you've referenced, whether you've directly quoted it or not. It's anything that you've referenced in your work. So if you have a citation in there, you'll need to make sure that that's referenced. What are the elements of a reference? Author, date, title, and source. And so these are the things that need to go in it. So the best way to think about it is this: how do I put a reference together? Who's responsible for this work? What date was it done? What was the work published? What's the title? Where did I retrieve this work? So these are all the elements that go into the work. Sometimes, and this is, I'm going off a little bit script here. You see this thing that says DOI? This is called a digital object identifier, okay? Think about it as a social security card for a work. This DOI uniquely identifies this article. So you could type in this HTTPS and this DOI, and it would pull up this article, okay? So it's unique only to this article, okay? So this is what a reference page should look like. You can see that it has the title reference on the top. It's its own page. The word reference is centered in bold, double spaced. Your references need to be listed in alphabetical order from the author's last name, okay? A-M-B, A-M-E, AMER, American Association of University of Professors. Then the date would be the differentiator here. AMANARATB, right? You see how that works? So they need to be listed in alpha order. You should double space your references. The first line should be flushed to the left margin, and then every subsequent line should be indented a ½ inch. Okay, does this make sense? Do you see how that's done here? Flush on the left margin, indented half space. Some of the elements, you have the name of the author, first name. If there's a middle initial, you put you have the last name, first initial, second initial. Use the ampersand. So see, you have author 1, ampersand author 2, date. Depending on the reference, you'll have what type of reference, you'll have the title, the source, some very specific information, and we're going to talk about these, and then a DOI. If there's no DOI available, you could put the URL, and if it's a text or a book you have in paper, then you wouldn't need to do it. Okay, so does that make sense? All right. So when you're listing your author's name, you want to invert it, last name followed by the initials. Capitalize only the first word of the title and the subtitle, the first word after a colon or a dash in the title, and the pronouns. So one of the big mistakes I see in student papers is they're going to capitalize this entire string in the reference page. That's not appropriate. You only want to capitalize the first word or anything that comes after a colon, or a formal name, something that grammar would dictate that it needs to be capitalized, okay? In journals, you want to capital all major words in a journal title. The journal, economic, management perspectives. See how those are capitalized? Whereof and the ampersand are not. You can italicize titles of longer works, such as books and journals. So you see how this is italicized? Do not italicize, underline, or print quotes around the titles or shorter works, okay? So you'll see here, there's no parentheses, there's no underlining. This is an APA 7 reference for a journal article. How do I know that? Well, first of all, it's in the title here, journal, right? This over here is the volume number. So this came from the 12th volume, first issue of the Journal of Economic Management and Management Perspectives. Note that the journal and the volume number is italicized. The issue is in parentheses, not italicized. And then you have the page number. Note there is no P or PP for page number. The page number simply follows the comma, okay? Does that make sense? I know this is a lot throwing at you, and I don't expect you to memorize this, but I want you to conceptually see what it looks like. You will be getting this deck, and then you'll be able to look through the APA number, okay? Through the reference number. So let's kind of demystify making the reference list. Understand that APA is a little bit has a complex system of citation, and the best way to do it is to make it simple. So ask yourself some questions. First of all, what's this type of source? Is it a book? Is it a journal article? Is it a web page, right? Once you identify the source, it takes a lot of the guesswork out of the mix. One thing to do, especially when you're starting to understand or learn APA, is find a sample citation for this source. You know, I don't know if you use like Google Scholar. Most of us use Google, right, to look things up. You can actually go to Google Scholar, type in Google Scholar in your search bar. It'll pop up a new web page, and then you can search scholarly articles, you know, for things like that. And then you can see how things are cited in those articles, right? So you can look for samples, then you can mirror the samples. And then, you know, obviously we've talked about, make sure that the entries are listed in alphabetical order. So when you're putting your reference list together, the first thing is make it simple, identify what you're looking for. If you're not sure how to do it, find a sample of that citation, mirror it, and making sure you express it in the alpha order as we've talked about, okay? So that's a little bit about references. So does anybody have any specific questions about references before we go on? If you have a question, unmute yourself and just say I have a question, we'll go from there. All right, hearing none, we're going to go into in-text citations. So an in-text citation helps readers locate the cited source in the references in when you use it in a paper. In-text citations could either be parenthetical, which we're going to talk about, or they can be in a narrative format. So what this definition doesn't tell you is while in-text citations certainly help the reader locate information, how does it help you as a writer? Well, if you're framing an argument, if you're making a point, if you're trying to win an argument or a debate, or if you want to make a point in your writing, one thing is to say, I think that A, B, C, and D, and that's your opinion and your belief. But how much more powerful is it if you can say, you know, one of the things I believe in is X, Y, and Z, and these authors, author A, author B, author C, also subscribe to the same school of thought, right? Now you're warranting your argument with other sources, and what does that do to your argument? It makes it much more powerful, right? Because it's not just what you think, you've actually pointed back to other scholarly articles. So while there is, or other resources, so while there is some benefit to the reader, there's a lot of benefit to the writer as well. A parenthetical and citation includes the author's last name and publication submitted by a comma. So this is a parenthetical. You know, this is the paraphrased, right? This is a paraphrase. It's not a direct quote. This is a paraphrase. And then you put it in a parentheses. Note that the period goes after the parentheses, okay? Sometimes people put the parenthesis here. That's not correct. You want to paraphrase what the author is saying. In parentheses, put the author's last name and the year, close the parentheses, and then put the punctuation mark, okay? As opposed to a narrative, this is a narrative. Narrative, the biggest difference is now you're bringing the author into the narration. So where this way, you don't reference the author at all, only in a parentheses. Here, you're actually saying, Kohler noted the dangers of falsely balanced news coverage, right? So you see how that the difference, they're almost saying the same thing. The difference is now you're bringing Kohler and his perspective directly into your narrative, okay? And the way this is expressed, you have the author's last name, then the parentheses with the year, okay? Parenthetical, narrative. Okay, this is a parenthetical, this is a narrative. It's absolutely important that you understand the difference between those two. A little bit more about in-text citation. If the source you're citing includes specific parts, add that information to your citation. What that means is if you're directly quoting something, if you're copying and pasting a quotation, that's appropriate. It's not plagiarism as long as you cite it, and you cite it in a way that's a little bit different. So here, this is a paraphrase, right? We talked that this is a paraphrase, and this is a parenthetical citation for a paraphrase. This is a parenthetical for a direct quote. What's the difference? I am now pointing the reader to exactly where I pulled that from. I pulled it from this author's work, this year, and this page number. So now the reader has a way to know exactly where he pulled it from. If you're citing like a book, a journal, something that has page numbers, it's pretty straightforward. But sometimes web pages don't have page numbers. Sometimes journals, especially electronic journals, don't have page numbers. What do you use? Well, you have to find an identifier. You could use a line, you can use a section, you know, under the vision and mission section. You can use a paragraph number. You can use a line number. The key is if you're using a direct quotation for a parenthetical or narrative, make sure that you have an identifier, a location place for it in either the parenthetical or in the narrative citation, okay? Does that make sense? Is it clear the difference between a paraphrase and a direct quotation? Do you all see the difference? If you're paraphrasing something, you do not necessarily need to use the specific parts of the source. If you're doing a direct quotation, you must add the information, that information to your citation, okay? And for reference, this is APA 7-813.
I have a question.
Yes.
You can quote directly from the author's page, but
yes,
provided you put the author's the page number.
Yes, so that's a great question, Theophilus. This is an example of what that would look like. So this is a short quotation, okay? And there's a difference between a long quotation and a short quotation. I'll get to that in just a second. But this author, whoever wrote this sentence, is signaling to the reader that these words, the application of the CRISPR technology to improve human health, is being explored across public and private sectors. These are not the author's words who wrote the paper. These are the words of Hong, who wrote them in 2019, and they can be found on page 503. You see how that works? So the author the author used this direct quotation because he couldn't say it any better than Hong could. And so he's telling the reader, I'm going to be using a direct quotation. I have these quotation marks. That's the first signal. And he did it right by adding a page number. Okay. This is how you would do it in a parenthetical. If you wanted to bring Hong to the conversation, you would say Hong stated that, and then you do the quotation, and you can see how it's different. Now Hong is part of the narrative. You have the year must follow the name of the author, but the page number must go at the end of the closed quotation mark, and the period goes at the end of the parentheses, okay? So you can see Theophilus that this is he used Hong's exact words. This is how he expresses it parenthetically, and this is how he cites it narratively, okay? So if you're quoting something 39 words or less, okay, this is super important. You want to use a short quotation, right? It's 39 words or less, okay? If you're quoting something 40 words or more, you're going to use what is called a long or a block quotation, okay? And they look different. So what does this mean? It means that you do not use quotation marks to open or close a quotation. Those 40 words become their own paragraph, okay? So you're taking this block of 40 words and you're making it its own paragraph. You start the block citation on a new line and you indent the whole block ½ inch from the left margin, okay? If there's additional paragraphs, so if you're doing a block quotation for 3 or 4 paragraphs, indent the first line of each subsequent paragraph an additional ½ inch. You want to double space the entire block quotation. Don't add extra lines before or after it. And then you're going to cite the source in parentheses after the quotation, final punctuation. So let's take a look at an example, okay? So this is a parenthetical block quotation. So you can see here's what the writer said. Researchers have studied how people talk to themselves, colon. You see how this whole text is now indented. This whole block of information is indented ½ inch, and it's its own paragraph. This is a direct quote, but notice what's missing. There's no quotation marks, right? You see that? There's no open, no close quotation marks. You notice in this direct quote, there's quotation marks. Notice where the period is. In a short quotation, the period is after the citation. In a block quotation, the period is after the citation. I'm sorry, after the quote, and there's no there's no punctuation after the parentheses. Okay, let's look at that again. Quotations, period after the parentheses, right? You see that? Quotation marks, in-text citation, period after the parentheses. Quotation mark, narrative citation, period after the parentheses. Short quotation. Block quotation, 40 words or more, no quotation marks. Period after the text, no parentheses after no period after the parentheses. If this was a narrative, I would write something like Anderson, Day, and Fernieho, 2015, studied how people talk to themselves and said, and then I would quote this, and then all I would do is I'd put the period here and then the page number here. Does that make sense? Can you see the differences between, so now we've learned differences between parenthetical and narrative, and now you should be able to identify a difference between a short quotation, which is 30 words, which is 39 words or less, and a long quotation, which is 40 words or more.
So like after the 39 words, like in this case, it's more than 39 words. You don't have to put quotation before inner and then quotation after the bracket. Nice.
Yeah, because it's over 40 words. It's over 40 words. If it's under 30 words, then you must use quotation marks. If it's over 40 words, and you don't do it right, your faculty will say, this is over 40 words, you need to block cite this. That's what this looks like right here. This is a block cited text, okay? We've already talked about this, but you can see the differences. Here's some more differences between a parenthetical, right, and a narrative. The one difference here is that you see how they use the et al over here. Et al means all these authors without having to write them down. It's essentially you're identifying this work without having to incorporate all the authors. APA 7 says you can, in APA 6, the rule was you have to use this type of citation first, and then anytime after you can use the et al. APA 7 says you can use et al from the very beginning, okay?
Okay.
And you can see how it's expressed. The first author, et al. Period citation, or year. Okay, a couple other quick things. Introduce quotations with signal phrases. According to Reynolds argued, again, you're signaling to the writer that you're going to be using somebody else's work, all right? And then make sure you give it its proper location. You know, in this case, it's page 3. And you can use signal words like acknowledged, you know, so you could right here, Reynolds acknowledged that, Reynolds contended that, Reynolds reported that, Reynolds concluded that. You want to signal to the reader that you're going to be using a direct quotation. Use the past tense or the present perfect tense of verbs in signaling phrases when they discuss past tense. Okay. Sometimes you're going to use 2 or more works. So maybe you want to add additional strength to your argument. All you have to do is, again, in alpha order, use the name of the authors, and you're going to separate them from a semicolon. So Adams wrote this book, Collins wrote this book, and this is what they said. Okay. And it's not uncommon to use 2 or 3 or 4 authors, especially if you want to reinforce a point. Again, one citing 2 authors in a narrative. Remember we talked about narrative? If you're citing 2 authors in a narrative, use the word and. Okay? If you're using 2 authors in a parenthetical, use the ampersand. Okay? Big difference. In a narrative, use the word and. In a parenthetical, use an ampersand. One citing works with 3 authors. We've already talked about using the et al. List the first name of the author plus et al. In every citation. This is how you do it parenthetically. Narratively, and this is how you do it parenthetically. Notice the difference is there's no comma over here, and the entire string is in parentheses. In a narrative, it's just the year that's in a parentheses. Okay. The sooner you can understand between a parenthetical and an in-text citation, that's going to help a lot. That's one of the areas that a lot of sometimes students struggle. If there's an unknown author, cite the source. So, for example, we don't know who wrote this, but here's how gardening benefited your health is the name of the article. So you can cite the full title in a narrative, and just cite the first word in a parenthetical. Okay. This is just going into some specifics. So when you're citing group authors, for example, like the FDA, this is a direct quote, and you're citing the FDA. This is a report from the FDA. So you could express it as the FDA, 2019. If you mention the group in a parenthetical citation, list the abbreviation in square brackets. So Food and Drug Administration, and then in parentheses, that's in parentheses, but in brackets, you're going to put FDA and then the year. Okay? And you'll get this deck. The point is, in going through this, is start recognizing that different resources are going to have different ways of expressing. Could have different ways, but they all follow the same standard. When citing authors with the same last name, use a first initial with the last name. So Davis, B. Davis and Y. Davis, they have the same last name, but they have different publications. So you can see how that's expressed. When citing two or more works by the same author and published in the same year. So maybe Chen wrote 3 articles in 2018. Chen's first article would be expressed with an A. Chen's second article would be expressed with a B. Chen's third article would be expressed with a C, okay? In-text citations, if there's no page numbers, we've already talked about this. Point back to, for example, this citation came back from the health benefits of kale section. This citation came from paragraph 2 of this resource. So if you don't have a page number, you can appropriately use a section number. You can use a paragraph number. If it's an audio recording, you can use a timestamp. The key is if you're using somebody's direct words, you have to attribute it specifically to where that where you can find that work, okay? Moving on along, these are with no page, we've already talked that, no page numbers. All right, so that should give you a sense about citations. There's just a couple other things I want to cover off. Headings. If you write a paper that has multiple headings, you want to make sure you're signaling to the reader whether it's a first level, second level, third level, or fourth level heading. So for example, this is a first level heading. I'm talking about the methods. So this is a method of how I did my study, right? That's the first level. That's the alpha level of a heading. The second level is these are the things that I measured, or these are the measures that I use. So this is subordinate to this, right? You see the relationship? This measures is a part of that. The exercise is a part of measures, that is a part of methods. Yoga is a part of group exercise, which is a part of exercise, which is a part of measures, which is a part of methods. This is a first level, right? The highest level. We're going to take it down to a second level. The difference between a first level and second level, first level is centered, second level is justified to the left. A third level, and they're both bold. A third level, you can see, is italicized and bold. A fourth level is indented, not italicized, in bold. A fifth level is indented, bold, and italicized. What you're signaling to the reader is that all of this content is connected to methods, but group exercise, spin class and yoga is connected to use group exercise, whereas yoga at home and individual cycling is connected to individual exercise, right? Do you see how that works? So generally speaking, you should only have one first level, but you can have several other second, third, fourth, fifth levels. You see the difference? Level 1, we're talking about methods. Level 1, we're talking about results. Two different topics, and all of these sections support that, but not all of these sections support, mood, for example. Does that make sense? It can be a little bit confusing. The best way that I've found to do this is that if I get confused when I'm outlining, if you've ever outlined before, you have alpha, or you have Roman numerals and alpha, and then letters, and then the Roman numerals. If you match these up with Roman numerals, and that tends to work. Okay, so here's what we just covered. If it's a first level heading, it's got to be centered, bold, title cased. If it's a second level heading, flush to the left, bold. Third level heading, flush to the left, italicized. Fourth level heading, indented, bold. Fifth level heading, indented, bold, italicized. First level heading, second level heading. These two are related. These two, while they're all related to methods, these two have the title relationship. these two have the title relationship. These two are sections of here. These two are sections of here. This and this are a section of that, which is a section of that, right? Do you see the chronology? It will take time to understand, but the better you can the sooner you understand it, the more concise your writing is, especially when you're moving between sections. Couple other things. When you're doing tables, this is what an APA table looks like. You have the table 1, table 2, table 3. The label and the title appear on separate lines above the table flush left, single spaced. This is a table number, the name of the table. You can see the table is centered, and then any notes under it. Figures are the same way. Figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, the number of the figure, the title, and the image. So let me stop sharing. And that was a mouthful. So let me check the. We have about 10 more minutes for questions, but I thought we were going to finish this part quicker. But let me answer this question. So JC asks, if the citation does not have a page number, do you just add the last name and the year? If it's a paraphrase, that would be fine. And as long as you reference it, and as long as you have the right reference on your reference page. If you're doing a direct quote, whether it's long or short, you'll have to anchor back to a specific page number, a line number, a section number, an audio stamp. You'll have to anchor back to something specific. Okay? Anybody else have any other questions? Yeah, so when you see that reference, so Griselda writes, I've seen reference ND. ND means no date. So that there isn't any date attributed to that specific work. So you're putting ND, you're citing that there's no date. Okay, and you'll find that on websites. You might find that in articles. Sometimes web articles don't have dates. ND means no date. And that the only difference, Griselda, is that you would put a comma between reference and end. There would be a comma and then a space. Is there a rule when to use parenthetical versus narrative? Not that I've been able to see. It really depends on how you're positioning it into a work. I personally, if I'm making a point and I want to add a strong argument, so if I said, one of the things that my research determined is, A, B, C, and D. Koch and French in their work also found similarities in da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So now I'm standing on the shoulders of others and extending what they're thinking. But you can also say, so I would use a narrative that if I'm just trying to make a point, sometimes organizational leadership requires this. I would use a parenthetical, and I might put 2 or 3 different authors there that would support that same statement. So the best answer I can give you, Jen, is it depends on how you're positioning it and the impact you want to make on the writer. Christy asked a question, do we need to include the date in which we retrieve the data online? That's a terrific question. And the answer is in a reference page. Let me escape here real quick. In a reference page, and I'm going to show you this here just quickly. The answer is no. In APA 7, you don't need to put a retrieve date. That's one of the changes between APA 6 and APA 7 in the reference page. You can just drop the retrieve date, okay? I'm going to show you an example. Let me just show you this quick example. This is from, let me just share the page here real quick. This is from the APA style guide, apastyle.apa.org. Can you see that? Brent, can I get a thumbs up if you can see that? You can see that this is a journal article. They have the name of the authors, the year, the title, the name of the work, the volume, the issue, the page number, and then the DOI number. Nowhere here does it say retrieved from. You can drop that in APA 7, okay? Let me stop sharing screen. Well, I don't see any other questions.
Yeah, Prof, I have a question.
Sure.
You said like, citation from like FDA, you don't have to identify the individual people. You don't need to identify. What are from a group of researchers, that like if there's 4 researchers in an article, do you need to identify their names individually? If you have like a group of researchers in an article.
Yeah, so it depends. APA 7 in a narrative or a parenthetical will allow you to use the et al. So in an in-text citation, you can use et al. But in the reference page, right? Remember that your in-text citations need to correlate with a reference on your reference page. You must list all the authors. You must list the authors of that work in the reference page.
And you say like for the FDA, they don't have to specify, like it's from FDA, like from the FDA.
Well, yeah. So if you're pulling a resource from the FDA, you'll have to cite FDA or Federal Drug Administration comma, and then the year that you're attributing to, and then the page number and things like that. Yeah. And if you don't have an organization, if you don't have an author, but you have a website, then you could cite the website with the appropriate date and other attributions if you needed to. So Brent is asking a question, in using footnotes, do we leave the footnote in the default font or do we have to change it to the font? No, by definition, a footnote is just that, and it should be separate from your paper. And so typically speaking, it puts it at a smaller font in the bottom of the page, and it's referencing to the author that this is supplemental material to what I'm writing here. So it's a footnote. It's something to keep. It's important, but it may not be part of this principal argument or principal text. Is it true that if you are not using a direct quote, it is not necessary to reference a DOI in the reference? No, you'll need to use the DOI, the digital object identifier, in the reference. If you're not using a direct quote, for example, the only thing that you don't have to use is the specific location, right? Page number, line, section, timestamp. But if you put something in the reference and there's a DOI number there, you need to use that in the reference page. Remember, the DOI is it's the best way to explain it. It's a social security card of that resource that you're using. And so if somebody wanted to validate your references, they could just cut and paste a DUI and put it into a DOI, excuse me. The DOI, they can cut and paste the DOI and put it in a search bar, and it would take them to that article. Does that answer your question, Chris? Oh, hope it answers. Oh, there we go. We got a yes. Before I forget, if you haven't had a chance to do it, I want to send this deck out, any other materials I can. If you can click on the link, I just put it in there to put your name and your email address. This helps me capture all your names and all your email addresses, and I can send you a copy of this deck and a copy of the recording as well. So if you haven't done that, I'd appreciate you doing that as well. Any other questions? The DOI is referenced only in the yes. You won't put the DOI in an in-text. You won't put the DOI in a narrative citation. You won't put it anywhere. You'll find it in the reference page. You're welcome. So we've got about 4 minutes left. Any other questions? I want to make maybe 1 or 2 other recommendations, but are there any other general questions before we move on from APA? I recognize that you are all in different programs and you are all in different parts of your study, right? Some of you are first-time students. Some of you this is your first session with LAPU, and some of you I recognize from other classes. The intent of this workshop isn't to give you, is to help give you tools and resources to successfully navigate your program. If there's anything that you pull away from this is to conceptually understand what APA is and the resources that we provided. One of them is the APA style guide that you can purchase. And then 2 of them are the free resources. The best way to get familiar with APA is to use it and look it up. And you might have to look something up 1 or 2 or 3 times, but I assure you, after looking it up several times, it just becomes a part of how you write. So I want to encourage you to embrace that. There's another question. Is there no author? If there's no author?
Are you going to send us the video?
Yes, I'll include it. I'll include this in the app. So Sheila's asking, if there's no author and only the title of the article, you will no longer put the retrieve from. It depends on where you got it from. If there's no author, but you pulled the article from a website, you would put the URL from the website where you retrieved it from. You just don't have to write retrieve from anymore, okay? Does that make sense, Sheila? I'm hoping that makes sense. Since we're talking about writing, especially if you've been out of school for a while, or if you're not 100% confident in academic writing, I want to recommend this book. I think it might be part of, some of you might have it, some of you might have seen it. It's called They Say, I Say, the Academic Moves, the Moves That Matter in Academic Writing. If you don't have this book, it's relatively inexpensive, and it really does help develop academic writing skills. So if you want to really refine academic writing, whether it's something you're thinking about getting a second master's or another a bachelor's or whatnot, I would recommend adding this book to your library. It's a really quick read, and I can tell you this became, as much as my APA 6 style guide was important to me, this became the second most used resource in my doctoral work as well. So I don't write this book. I don't make any profit on this book, but I can tell you this book is absolutely valuable to have. It's called They Say, I Say, the Moves That Matter in Academic Writing, and it's written by Gerald Graff and Kathy Birkenstein. So I think we're at the 8 o'clock hour. Are there any other final questions? Is there anything else left unanswered? All right, so I'll end on this. It was a pleasure. Our hope is that we can continue to do other workshops and other seminars like this. You know, my email address is frojas@lapu.edu. If you have a quick question around APA, if you're stuck, if you don't know where to look for something, drop me a quick note. I might not be able to respond to you right away, but drop me a note and I'll see what I can do to help. I will be hopefully this session recorded. I will be posting this recording into the app. So my team is going to help me put this onto the app. And I'll also be emailing a copy of the presentation. I do want to give credit to APA Style, the APA Style.apa.org and the Purdue OWL. A lot of the information that we covered today, I pulled it from those resources. And I want to encourage you to use all the resources available to you as well. So with that being said, if you need, if there's anything I can do to help, you don't have to create an account for Purdue OWL. It's absolutely free. That's the best part about it, is it's absolutely free. The 2 electronic resources I shared with you, the APA Style.apa.org and Purdue OWL, are free. And you can just do quick Google search for them, but they'll also be in the deck. So with that being said, I think this is a great place to end. I do appreciate you. If you have any suggestions of other topics you'd like to hear about, shoot me a quick email. And again, if you have any questions about APA or anything else that I might be able to help, shoot me an email. I'm here at your service, okay?